We welcome you to another broadcast of our new podcast, The Shepherd's Bookshelf. We started this last week, and we hope to continue for the days to come. And I'm excited about this whole project because I love to read. I know all of you are not exactly like I am, and some of you find reading very burdensome or difficult. You don't really enjoy it. And I really feel bad for people who do not enjoy reading because we miss out on so many wonderful things in life when we don't actually read the things that are out there. The whole world opens up to us as we sit in our chairs or at our desks by reading literature written by other people and other thinkers throughout the world. And so it has been a great joy for me to read, and I enjoy doing that. And I think most people can enjoy and learn how to enjoy reading if they would take some simple steps and have some understanding of why we read. So I want to talk about that here in our second podcast on the Shepherd's Bookshelf. Let's talk about the goal of our reading. Why do we read? For what purposes should we read? So let me give you three. There's probably many others, but here's three goals behind reading, why you might read. First of all, to be entertained. So we'll start with the simplest. There is nothing wrong with being entertained with reading. That doesn't mean that's all you do, and we don't always want to be reading simplistic things that have really very little value, but it's all right once in a while to just enjoy reading. As a matter of fact, I think if you'll read something that you enjoy, that will maybe deepen your desire to read things that are a little more meaty, a little more difficult, and a little more insightful. But you might want to start with the things that are just that you enjoy. Actually, I got hooked on reading, probably even as a child, a relatively young child, maybe 10 years old or so, by reading things that today I don't read. For example, I read comic books. And back in those days, the comic books, I think, were a little more benign, a little funnier, a little less cynical and sinister at times, but I enjoyed doing that. So I read the typical comic books, and I moved up to the little more aggressive comic books as time went on. What that did for me, though, is got me enjoying reading. Then I moved into, probably in junior high, to reading some books of things that interested me. Now, what interested me as a 12-year-old boy? Well, a couple things. One was the animal world. I enjoyed reading about animals, and so I read some animal books that I could find in my library. And then I began to read some deeper things. Jack London's books, The Call of the Wild, White Fang, those interested me. And then there's a lot of other literature, a lot of other books about wildlife, about dogs, about animals. This intrigued me. These are not things where I gained great insight into life necessarily, although there were principles there. But at the same time, I was just learning the enjoyment of sitting in my chair, and yet my mind went throughout all the world enjoying adventure. So I enjoyed those kinds of books. I also read, after that, some science fiction books. And those were interesting as well, and it's got my imagination going. So I read those kinds of books. And then there were adventure books as well, Treasure Island, those kinds of books that kids can read even at a young age, but they're not overly heavy. But the point was it helped me learn to enjoy reading. So I would suggest to you that if you have never read much and you want to begin to enjoy reading, find something that interests you and begin to read those types of things. Now, secondly, we read books to be informed. And this kind of goes along with the first idea of entertainment. If you want to be informed about a certain subject, there's vast literature out there that can help you be informed about these types of things. So if you want to know more about how to do almost anything, you don't just have to turn to YouTube, which I'm sure is helpful, but there are books that are more insightful. There's books I've read on fishing, for example, years ago that were not only about how to fish and some of the techniques of fishing, but also there were books about of lessons learned by fishing. lessons learned in nature that intrigued me, still intrigue me to this very day. And so I'll read about books like these. I'll read these kinds of things that I find interesting and the things I can learn from. So those are another reason why we might learn. Also to be challenged by ideas. So as we move from maybe the more simple things, the mechanical things, the carpentry, so forth, we can move to ideas. So what ideas are out there that can be helpful to you? History, for example. How I've loved to read history. If you don't know history, they say you're doomed to repeat it. There's a lot of truth to that. History just informs you of what has happened in the past that has shaped the present, and also may very well have shaped you and you didn't even know it. When we learn about the great conquerors of the past, the wars, the tyrants who've tried to take over their countries or the world, this is literature to learn from. We learn the evilness of people. We learn the good people. And that goes along with, the history goes along with biography. To read a good biography of a historic figure, of someone who has been a mover and shaker in our world, and also biographies of Christian leaders. I think it's kind of sad how few people know of, even a generation ago, of Christian leaders that really made a major impact on the cause of Christ. The martyrs, we know of the Aka Indian martyrs, but also at New Tribes Mission, now Ethnos 360. In the 40s, 5 men went out to reach a tribe of Indians in Bolivia, and they were all martyred for the cause of Christ. Few people even know about that story. But that was almost the launching pad of New Tribes Mission, later Ethnos 360, and the dedication of these people challenge us and encourage us. We need to read about these people. Read about the great saints of the past, the Martin Luthers, the John Calvins, the Charles Spurgeons, and more modern ones. There are so many. Machem, for example, would be a good example of one back in the 30s that would be something that well worth reading. And then much more modern people who have stepped up to the plate to serve Christ. Many of even the more contemporary Christian leaders who have made a big difference in Christianity have had books written about them. And these biographies can really shape and encourage and challenge us in our faith and in our walk with the Lord. And then I might want to read a book about how to do learning something and some skill set. I might want to read a book on fishing, learn how to fish. I might want to read books on mechanics to learn how to be a mechanic. But most importantly, I want to know how to follow Christ. Are there good Christian books available to us that will help us determine how we should live in our everyday Christian life? There are. There's books that teach us how to read the Bible. There's books that help us with our family life. There's books that will help us in our general Christian life. There are books that help us interpret Scripture, great commentaries. One of the most enjoyable things I've done in the last few years was to read through the book of Psalms, one psalm a day, using a wonderful commentary set, a 3-volume commentary set. And this commentary set took me through those psalms each morning, and it was so valuable, so helpful. So I learned things that I didn't personally know. Background information, the commentary information, insights into the passage of Scripture, how helpful that was to me. So you can learn things about God. Read books about God himself. And we'll be talking about some of those in the very early stages of this broadcast in other episodes. What about God? What about Jesus Christ? What are the best books that teach us about Jesus Christ? What is the best books that teach us the authority and value of the Scriptures themselves? What are the best books that can be understood by a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 40-year-old on theology? Is theology just this old boring stuff that doesn't matter much? Or is it alive and well? And does it help us in life? I think you know my answer to that already. So reading good books take us out of our normal life circumstances, takes us further. And I would encourage you also to read rather widely as you begin to read more. Don't just read books that already say what you already believe. Read some books that will press on that will give you new insights and even challenge your old ideas. You might be surprised of how valuable that is. So this is another broadcast that we're having, another podcast that I hope will encourage you to read. I want to talk more tomorrow about reading books themselves. So I hope you can join us, not tomorrow, but at our next time together next week. So I hope you can join us for that.